What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cojones Show. I'm Angel. With me, as always, is Carl Jones. What's up, Carl? How you doing?
Same old stuff, man. Doing well, a little worn out. I just started a new 9 to 5. I'm doing research on AI and robotics for the University of Texas at San Antonio, and that's been keeping me real busy the last week. Lots of seminars, lots of new info to learn.
Yeah, man, that's some big brain shit right there.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's what's up. So, like, what's your? What's the goal? Right, you're learning robotics and whatnot. Like, what are you working towards specifically? Like, what are you guys trying to figure out?
So there's like 8 or 9 different projects, and like the overarching idea here, right, is you have a bunch of things we can take from organics, right? So swarm behavior, different modeling behavior, different modeling structures. So one part of the project is to figure out how to take organic things that happen in biology, so like flocks of birds, bacterial behavior in a bloodstream, something like that, and get that represented mathematically on a computer. And then once you figure out how to do that, then it's okay, how do we design what's called a graph convolutional neural network so that we can take this data.
That's a whole lot of words, man.
Right? Take this data, throw it into a neural network, and then get results off the data. So figure out a way to model the data, collect a whole bunch of data, and then throw it at a neural network to get certain results based on that data. And the specific purpose of this, it's a DoD-funded project from the National Research Institute Foundation. And the whole idea, right, is basically in the United States in academia, we are really lagging behind compared to Europe and Asia in expertise in AI, robotics, 5G communication networks, and what's called large control mechanisms, especially for swarm. So if you want to talk about, how do you control 100 plus autonomous agents in some system? So the big way that we're focusing on it is automatically self-driving cars, right? That's a big thing right now. It's really easy to design in because driving on a roadway is functionally just 2D. You don't have to worry about flying through the air, so it's just two dimensionals. And then it's easy enough to extrapolate from 2D to 3D anyway. So, and you're taking advantage of stuff like neural networks. When we say AI, AI has like so much buzz term, pop culture stuff labeled onto it.
I blame Elon.
Right? Elon and Terminator are the two
That's
biggest things. The two biggest things researchers have to overcome when we present this to other people is the Terminator and Elon Musk.
Yeah, we got to wait for Elon to tweet about it for us to be comfortable.
Well, we got to wait for Elon to be a troll and dump the value of something with a freaking emoji.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Yo, man, so for those of you that don't know at home, today is actually kind of a big deal because it's actually D-Day, right? So this is the anniversary of D-Day, and one of the things that Carl and I were talking about before we started this conversation, he's off at college doing some big things. He's got a family. I have a family. We like to talk about what it's like being a man today in 2021, responsibilities, shouldering the burden of life, and just overall trying to live a good, fulfilled life. And I think that what better day for us to have a conversation around masculinity, around what makes a man, around what we're doing right and what we could be doing better than D-Day. Because as far as I'm concerned, today marks a special event in history that really, if there were ever a group of men in the history of mankind that ever did some shit, it was on that day. So putting it in the perspective of D-Day, a lot of those guys were pretty young, 18-year-olds having to go off, fight a foreign war against a real enemy that everybody agreed on, and put into context of 2021. I don't know that we have that in us anymore. And I know that might sound a little cynical, but I'll start the conversation there, is that, if you spent any time scrolling through TikTok, you might feel like we're lacking in the cojones department, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, it's a rough situation as far as that goes, because man, like so obviously I'm in academia. I'm also an educator, and I spend so much of my time just trying to convince young people. Like the number one thing I'm doing in mathematics, um, when I try to teach it to young people, so like 19 to 24-year-olds, the biggest thing I'm trying to do is to convince these young people that it is okay to believe in themselves, have confidence, and believe that hard work will get them results.
Mm.
They do not believe these things at all.
But like, why do you
It's
think
it,
that is though? Right? Like, why do you think we've gotten to a place where that I guess self esteem or that confidence is just lacking?
um, so I guess if there's two different ways for me to look at that, right? My personal experience with it, and then just what I get out of the students. So to take it to the students specifically, the young
Mm.
people that I work with a lot, um, man, there's a lot of kids who don't feel valued,
Mm.
right? They feel like somewhere someone told them, or they had some life experience that made them believe they weren't valuable for some reason. And
Man,
if it
that's
was
interesting
just,
you would say that though, right? Because if you think about it, our generation was the one that was told we could be anything we want to be.
yeah, well, I
Um,
think that's part of it, right? I think
mm,
when you get told that you can do anything and be anything, no
mm,
limits, and no one actually puts any realistic expectations on you, and then you have to, at 18, suddenly, you go from you're a child to 18, you're miraculously an adult. Um, and you have to face these harsh realities, and you get slammed face first into the wall of adulthood. It breaks a lot of those false narratives,
yeah.
and it breaks a lot of those dreams. So I think that's a big part of it, is that somewhere along the way they were fed unrealistic expectations, uh, and then they couldn't meet them, and that at any point in their life when they couldn't meet these unrealistic expectations, there was probably somebody telling them that it was something wrong with them. And instead of, there's
Or
two
the
different ways you
system,
can
right?
take that.
Somebody telling them that
Yeah,
like it's the system that's flawed. Like here's this peanut butter and jelly sandwich while I stroke your hair. It's not
right.
you, Johnny. It's the rest of the
Well,
world that's bad.
so even for that, right? There's two different ways to take that,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's two different ways to approach all of those situations. Whether it's something wrong internally with you, there are systemic problems that exist, so we can't deny that. But there's two different ways to take, like, bad things happen to people, so there are problems that happen to you. There are things internally that people struggle with, but there's two different ways to take that. You can take that as some kind of affront to you personally because you have a big ego, and you can let it fuck up your life, and you can become despondent or angry and ruin your life because of it. Or you can accept that life is not fair,
Mm.
that life is difficult. You can learn resilience and build character from it, and you can work around it. I think that's probably, not to go too deep on it, I think at some point in Western culture here, we decided any amount of suffering in life means that your life is not worth having
Mm.
just because there's some suffering in it,
Or
which is
or that
weird.
there's something wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like that somehow suffering is an indicator that there's something that has gone wrong in your life, which I'm in the camp that believes that suffering is not only a part of life, but it is a necessary part of life. It is required for you to mature and for you to grow into the man specifically, or the human that you're supposed to be. But I think a lot of people, to your point, like to avoid suffering as much as possible, and then they take that as an indicator, similar to pain, just
Mhm.
physical pain, right? Whenever we experience physical pain, we take that as an indicator to stop doing the thing that's causing us physical pain. But anybody who's spent any amount of time either playing a sport or actively trying to develop themselves in a physical way know that you have to push through the pain because that's where you get the gains, right? So I think I mean that's a great point, man. That suffering has turned into this kind of this early warning system for people, and instead of pushing through, they tend to disengage.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact quote. Let me go look it up real quick because it's really good and I don't want to misquote it. Let's
Who said it?
see. It's old. Man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he his. Okay, so it's the quote, right? Is man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he is both the marble and the sculptor.
Nice.
And that's just reality, right? And that
But
applies to
wait,
everything.
who said this? Now I'm curious, right? So,
Let's see. Man, can I remember who said this shit? It's Stoicism, Alexis Carrel. I don't know who Alexis Carrel is.
all
It's
right.
just a context-free quote. Let's see who Alexis Carrel is.
I I like
He's a
to know these things for my own
Oh, look at
personal
that.
research.
How weird is that? He's a French philosopher. He was in the French medical army medical corps. He had
Yeah,
a bachelor's of
Nobel Prize dude, right?
science.
Look at this.
Yeah, he fought in World War One. He was a major in the French Army Medical Corps. Um, he developed
So
the
smart guy.
well-known, yeah,
I mean,
smart dude,
that's a
right?
beautiful quote, man. Honestly, like
It
I
is,
think it's
and it applies to everything. It's
yeah,
not just so many times when people read things like that, they get too attached to like the physical side of things. Of course, it takes struggle, effort, and pain to develop a body. But if you want to overcome some trauma that's happened to you in your life, if you want to become a better person, if you want to fix your bad habits, there's a lot of struggle and pain and a lot of time legitimate emotional and mental suffering to overcome that. When I was a kid, I was really overweight, and I didn't hear it put like this until much later on, but something that I had to deal with when I was like 12, 13, and I was 5'8" and 220 pounds. I was a little fatty. Something I had to do to overcome that, the mental process that went through, is that there is a version of me inside myself who was a good friend of mine. He took care of me. He made things easy for me. He gave me excuses, and he, handed me, ways out.
mm,
And I had to kill him
yeah,
so that I could get through being overweight and become healthy. This
yeah,
person, this version of me who I liked quite a bit, made my life very comfortable. I had to kill him and
yeah.
destroy
Moral of the
him,
story: murder your
you
friends. No,
know,
I'm just kidding.
definitely. But I had to get rid of this part of me. And
Yeah,
that's what it felt like. When I look back on so much of my own personal development, so much of it, even things like dealing with mental health and moving past trauma, working through trauma, getting past being a childish little punk who cared too much about myself and thought too much about myself, all of these things, learning to be responsible, learning to be accountable to people around me. So much of this required me, the way that I think about it now, after I heard it explained like that by someone else, so much of it feels exactly like that. It feels like I have to take these parts of me which are comfortable
hmm,
and excise them out of my life. And
yeah,
it's not easy and it sucks, but it makes me a better person.
yeah. No, and I mean, this is the these are all great points, right? Just looping this back to the conversation around D-Day, right? And you have these young men who had to fight uh, uh, an enemy, the likes of which the world had never really known. And when you try to put yourself in their shoes and understand what they must have been feeling and understand the turmoil that they went through, right? Because even today, if you deploy to a foreign country to fight a war, there are luxuries and there are things that we know are going to be available to us, right? So, for example, internet to some capacity. A mail is much better. Your ability to communicate with your family back home is going to be a lot easier, even if you're in Afghanistan or whatever it may be. And then I look at us having this conversation, and I look at some of the trends that I see in our culture, some of the things that have become very popular. For example, blurring the lines, and I'm not talking here about gender identity. I'm simply talking blurring the lines between boys and girls is
Mm,
something that as a father worries me, because as a father I could see firsthand, I'm running an experiment with my own children, that there are definitive differences between males and females and how they behave. And in our society, we're telling people that we're telling kids specifically that these differences don't exist.
mhm.
Um, so looking at D-Day specifically, those men were brave men that went out and they did brave men shit, right? Like they, whether they had a choice or not, right? They went
Yeah.
out and they did it. And that's
Well, that's
shit.
what made them
That's what
brave.
made them brave. Exactly. That's what I was about to say, is that it was, I can guarantee you that none of them wanted to leave their families, right? To go fight this war and probably die, right? Not possibly die, but probably die. Um, to now fast forward and saying, hey, being brave isn't that big of a deal. Being strong, being resilient, being tough isn't that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially letting kids and letting people, leaving them to their own devices and
Yeah.
putting comfort above everything else. I'm afraid for my sons specifically, right? Just because
Yeah.
being a guy in society, as it turns out, is not as easy as a lot of people would make it seem. And I think that we're overemphasizing and prioritizing and putting out the wrong message to young men specifically who are a little lost and trying to find their way in the world.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, within the context of both war and being a brave man, because women fight war now.
Mm.
So I'm not trying to say that this is something that only a man can do, right? You can be a brave woman and you can do masculine things, what we might have traditionally called masculine, right? So I'm not trying to take that away from anybody. However, look at this historically speaking, right? We want to look at the importance of not downplaying masculine concepts, traditionally masculine concepts, confidence, bravery, resiliency, gut, strive, wanting, individual, like strong sense of individuality, wanting what you believe is yours, right? Let's put this in context of something that a lot of the people who are very anti-masculine today can understand. Roll it back to the late 1950s, early 1960s to late 1960s, our civil rights movement. We have 3 generations of men who at home are disenfranchised, are oppressed, are segregated, do not have their rights, are not allowed to be equal citizens, various members of different minorities, basically everybody who wasn't a white dude from World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, right? They go off and they fight these wars, and they do horrific, hard work to be soldiers. And it builds them up. It develops character within them because they have done some of the most challenging, trying things a human being can do. They have gone and fought and survived in war.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come home and they come back to being mistreated. They don't have the rights everyone else has. They are not treated equally in society. They are segregated at every turn. They are denied access at every turn. And these are the kind of men that beforehand may not have cared very much, but when you go and fight a war and come back and survive, you don't walk around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you don't walk around looking at the pavement anymore. You keep your eyes up and you have confidence and you know what you're worth and you demand it. So if those men hadn't done that, it is no coincidence whatsoever that we had multiple generations of men who went and fought in horrific warfare that were built by it, came home and said, I'm not putting up with this. You will treat me equally. You will give me my rights. And they changed the world and they made the country a better place because of it.
Yeah, or in the case of Vietnam, they started motorcycle gangs and shit. I'm just kidding.
Right. But still, they came back and they demanded equal treatment. They demanded fair treatment. And I don't think it's really any surprise that as we transitioned the military away from something that you did because you had to into something that you could make a career, like, a politician could make a career out of, and we transitioned it into this very peacetimey thing. And we stopped paying importance to what it meant, and we started really underselling it socially and devalued it post-Vietnam and turned it into this whole like for-profit industrial complex thing. I don't think it's any surprise whatsoever that we see the same group of people who worked so diligently and tirelessly to create equality. All of their effort went to shit, and we see all of these positive indicators of equality go away when literally all they asked for was, I want to compete the same as everyone else. And in the 80s, we see all of these robust programs being built up that start these downtrends and all of these things. So you see basically everybody's sort of improving for a couple decades. And, I'm a huge proponent of safety nets, social safety nets. But I don't think it's weird at all when you see the introduction of all of these really robust welfare programs and things trend negatively. And then in the 90s, Bill Clinton gets rid of a lot of them and restricts a lot of them. And lo and behold, the 90s were one of the best economic eras for everybody, like in the whole world, unless you were Japan. Japan kind of got shit on, but
Yeah, yeah,
basically everybody else did
yeah,
great,
yeah.
you know? So there's so much pressure against being a man. And what I mean by that is like obviously like I've worked in some of the most liberal environments you can imagine in academia. I've spent some time at UT Austin, and I've literally had people stop me in the parking lot and be like, "Why do you think it's okay to be a white dude?" Basically, or like question me about who I voted for, like they were gonna run some kind of political pogrom on me if I said
Mm.
I voted for Trump or something.
Yeah, yeah, they were getting
Um,
ready to throw you in the gulag.
yeah. Uh, so I've been there, I've seen that stuff, but at the same time, like I've never felt as if I didn't have a place as a man, if only because I know when I show up somewhere, I'm going to carve out a spot for myself no matter
Mm.
what. Um,
It's a
but
shame
at
that more
this,
people don't feel that way, right? Like
yeah, and
it's a shame that to some degree and to some level, some of this is like this has been lost on on this up and
yeah,
coming generation, right? Because you and I are
mhm,
both we're Gen Y, right? So when we're talking about Gen Z and Gen Alpha,
mhm,
looking at some of the things, and we can see this happening, right, by some of the trends that we see happening in society, by some of the things that we see in social media. Things go viral for a reason, right? There has to be a certain number of like people need to engage with a particular piece of content for it to go viral. So if you see it and it has millions of views, it would be safe to assume that millions of people have seen this, and a certain percentage of them agree to some degree, right? Or just hate it to some degree, and that's how the algorithms work. So when I see, you're talking like, well, I'm just going to carve out this space for myself if need be. Well, that's what a man would do. That's what somebody who at to some degree, to some level, has self-reliance. But what we're seeing instead is saying, well, there isn't a place for me, so people must accommodate me,
yeah,
right? It's not, you're not, the responsibility shifts from
mhm,
you carving out the space to someone accommodating you.
yeah,
And I think that it's an insidious precedent that was that was set years ago and started as a joke, right? This
yeah,
started as, oh, everybody's getting a trophy, participation trophies or whatever. And it probably even started when we were babies, right? Where
mhm,
it was like, oh yeah, you could be anything you want to be, sure. It's like, okay, Sharon, your kid doesn't even know how to wipe his ass. He's about to be, you know, he's about to be an
yeah,
engineer or scientist or some shit, and he doesn't even know his,
mhm,
can't count to 10. It probably started back then, right? But what we've been seeing more and more is is less individual responsibility, less personal
mhm,
responsibility and accountability, and more make me feel comfortable. And I think for young men specifically, and again, I have two boys, so for me, if I fast forward 10 years, this all of a sudden becomes extremely relevant in the
mhm,
social context for my kids, because right now I am the education that they're getting around manhood and masculinity. And in my house, we follow very traditional gender roles, and I'm not going to mince any fucking words about it. I'm the man, my wife is the woman, I provide, she takes care of the house, and that's just the way that things have kind of worked themselves out. It wasn't I'm about to oppress you and like whatever. No, it's just simply it's funny how these things work, right? It's just funny how these things work. So my boys are seeing that as an example, but when they get out into the real world, they might be told, or they will be told if nothing changes, that the example that they've been given has been incorrect this entire time. That
mhm,
somehow, right, whether it's traditional gender roles or whether it's the masculine energy that all males have inside of them, somehow they're the problem, and
yeah,
society is the solution. And
yeah.
that's really what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, well, I think if you look back at things historically, right? Some of this stuff is solutions to problems that definitely did exist and continue to exist to this day in various ways, right? But it's an overcorrection, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a good example of my concern about this stuff, put it in the realm of video games. There was some research I was reading, right? Because in video games, everybody's very scared about the the scary gamer kids shooting up the school or whatever, right? There's some psychological research done that basically showed lower skilled, worse male players are the fastest to be aggressive and misogynistic towards female players.
Mm.
Lower skilled, worse white players are the fastest to be racist towards minority players, right? The guys who are better at the game don't give a shit. They're focused on the game.
Mm.
The people who suck turn everything into a competition about how I can etch out some sort of misappropriated superiority over you.
That's actually
right?
really fucking interesting.
I think if you roll this back a little bit,
Mm.
there was a point in time where we started to discuss about who should have what role in society. I don't have a problem with talking about what role anybody should play in society. Personally, I want my wife to be able to do whatever the fuck she wants to do, and if any other man on this planet tries to put her in a spot, that ain't gonna fly, right? She can do whatever the fuck she wants to do. And the women in my family can do whatever the fuck they want to do. Any daughter I potentially have, she's going to be told from day one, you can do whatever the fuck you want to do. And no one's going to tell you you have to be in any position doing any specific thing. That shit's for you to decide. I don't have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think what happened was our conversations about these things were overcorrections. And since the 1960s, especially white guys in America, have been expected to have a set of social standards and character expectations for themselves that have turned them into losers.
Mm.
So when you're a loser, it's easier to turn every little thing away from focusing on what it's about into some kind of bullshit superiority scam where you try to, since you can't compete with the better people, okay, well, I'll target these people who I think are worse than me, and I'll break them down the same way losers don't ever build themselves up. They just try to break other people down. I'll break down these other groups. I think what happened was we had too few people who were willing to put in the time and the effort and the energy to just be the best they could be at something. We're way too concerned about their position in the pecking order among losers. And what people focused on was that. So they sought these really huge overcorrections that aren't fixing anything. All it's doing is making people feel less secure with themselves. It's making people worse at things. It's teaching people that hard work cannot get you results.
Mm.
So, of course, they never try. So how long is it until this gamer situation?
Yeah.
How long is it till everybody's like that?
So it's funny, man, because I think that, you brought up race here. And I think that a part of that, a piece of this argument could be made that some of it is already happening in minority communities as well. And it's been happening as long as this has been a thing. It's been happening where you see people who are at the lower end trying to reach up and rip people down. And I think that's evident anywhere. I mean, Tim Scott a couple weeks ago saying America isn't racist. How did people prove America wasn't racist? By calling him an Uncle Tom. Like, that is a perfect example of people at the bottom who probably have extremely low self-esteem, have very little to offer society, trying to actively rip somebody down who threatens them and who threatens their worldview. So I think that this has to do with pretty much anyone anywhere that's at the bottom. They tend to actively look for opportunities and people for them to bring down, because what better way to make yourself feel better about yourself than by having company, right? By being able to look around and be like, well, at least I'm not the only shitty one. What's scary to me is that that's become the cool thing to do, right? Is that now, instead of seeing somebody who's above you, and saying I should work harder, right? Instead of saying what's wrong with me, right? What are they doing right and what am I doing wrong? It's well, clearly, like, this is unfair, right? There's no equity here, and then trying to make that right by tearing somebody down as opposed to trying to lift yourself up. And it worries me because, number one, I'm afraid for my kids because they're definitely not going to fucking fit in this world. Because I'll tell you right now, I'm the type of parent that I will demand excellence in the things that they do. And it's not excellence in outcomes, but at the very least, excellence in your approach, excellence in the process and in the effort put forth, right? So
Yeah.
if you're in school and you have a test coming up and you didn't study and you failed, you and I are going to have words. If you're in school and you studied and you failed, I understand. Let's identify the problem, right? My kids aren't going to fit in a world that says, oh, you failed. Well, it's everybody else's problem. Here's this grading curve to help you out because, you know, one of your parents isn't white and you know, whatever. And I think that that's a bad message to send little boys and young men in particular, because that's just, from an evolutionary perspective, and I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but from the things that I've read and the conversations I've heard, that's just not how we're programmed. That's not how we're designed to approach life. And it concerns me that this is exactly where we are right now, that we say nothing you do matters, so do whatever you want. If you don't get your way, we'll bend the system so that you can get your way, even if it's at the expense of people who are working harder than you, who are better than you. And
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I was never like that growing up. So I'm just, that's why I'm so confused and dumbfounded by all of this.
Yeah, I think part of it, right? I think a big part of the correction is just taking the bravado out of the equation, right? So there's a little bit of literature I've been reading, mostly like on the older philosophy type stuff about the grace of a king, right? Where basically, if you want to be a good king, you have to understand you are the king. You can't give an inch. You cannot show any weakness. You cannot allow your authority to be challenged, right? Because you're the king. You're the one who's in charge. And if you show any weakness, then people will rise up with, cutthroat bloodthirstiness and steal what you have from you because they want to be in charge instead. So you cannot show any weakness. But at the same time, if you have too strong of a grip and too harsh of a word, then you don't have to worry about your political enemies killing you.
Yeah.
Your people will kill you. So you have to have the balance between having the power and control to rule with the grace necessary to make people want to follow you. So I think a big part of those overcorrections we did removed the grace part from men being men, right? Because like everybody wants to talk about how, things should be XYZ different way. I understand that stuff back in, maybe the 50s or before that wasn't exactly as like we've dreamed it up and shown in the movies, but I definitely understand that at a certain point in US history, it was more normal to tell a man that he shouldn't show his emotions, including his anger, that he should try to be more stoic and in control of himself. Somewhere along the way that got real toxic and it turned into a bunch of psychopaths. So I get it. We needed a better system than just telling young boys don't show any emotions. But we went too far. And when you're telling people, like we said before one time, when we're telling people that everything you feel is valid and the way you express your emotions is always valid, that makes tons of sense until you're a man with an anger problem.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, it's total bullshit, right? Like your response is not always going to be a valid response, and the way you feel isn't always going to be appropriate, right? Like the emotions have this weird way of just twisting shit in your head, right? Of like forcing you not to see things clearly. So if you simply allow your emotions to govern the way you react all the time, you're in for a really unhappy life. And I think that's exactly what's happening. It's people, if you're sad, it's like the governor has been taken off, right? And people just don't know how to regulate anymore. And like we're just kind of stuck in this weird state where the only things that matter is how I feel. It's like, people may not like him, but Ben Shapiro had the one quote that's super famous. Facts don't care about your feelings. That might be like the classic troll saying some shit, but that's actually, there's truth to that statement, is
Mm-hmm.
that there are facts and then there are your feelings, and hopefully your feelings and facts can kind of meet up, right? But there are going to be plenty of times where your facts and your feeling where facts and your feelings are going to be at odds. You know, for
Yeah.
example, you're on a fucking diet. Well, the
Mm-hmm.
facts are you're fat as shit and you should be on the diet. Those are facts.
Mm-hmm.
Those facts don't care about your feelings that you would really enjoy eating a Twinkie. Like they don't really care that Twinkie would bring you happiness, because the fact is your cholesterol's through the roof and you're morbidly obese. Right? So that's an example highlighting, like, well, you know, this phrase here there's value to it if you actually look at it and try to apply it. And I think we've just stopped regulating emotion
Yeah.
altogether and just said, let it fly, whatever you feel,
Yeah.
it's cool, no big
Well,
deal.
I think of like a real concrete example of what I'm talking about, where we overcorrected this and we let, because not all emotions are equal, right? So when we talk about let everybody be emotional, confidence is an emotion, anger is an emotion. We don't want men to be, the toxic emotions, right? So not every emotion is acceptable.
So, but what is
They
what would you consider toxic emotions?
Well, I think pretty much anger, like
Because
it.
I would
I think what
caution,
makes it
right? Like
I
the
think
whole
what makes
using
it toxic.
toxic, like as a with
Yeah, well,
masculinity, right? Like you.
yeah. I just mean to say that what is called toxic, right? What I
Mm,
mean to say by this is that when we say, all emotions are valid, that's not true. People, not only is it not true because it's not fact, it's not true because that's just a buzz phrase people use, and the people who say that do not treat all emotions equally.
mm.
Like I said, there's plenty of people who I've had conversations with, that said, all emotions are valid. That if I screamed in their face because they made me upset, they would not think that was a valid reaction, right? And they would blame me for that. They wouldn't be like, "Oh, what did I do to trigger him?" They wouldn't do that in a million years. So they don't think this is true, right? So what to give a real concrete example of sort of that grace of kings things I'm talking about, right? Where we overcorrected.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes you need to be told you're wrong, right? You may do something at work, or if you are playing a sport and you're being coached, you may do something that's wrong, doesn't make sense. You may make some kind of mistake. You may make a drastic error, and you need to be informed of this information. There are a couple good ways to go about it, and I think probably what ended up happening a lot of the time was what was chosen was to just like scream in your face and belittle you, which is not healthy. It doesn't actually get you the results that you want. Like this is very clear from psychological research. Screaming at people to get them to change negative behavior just reinforces the negative behavior. It rarely gets them to change it.
I don't know,
So I
man. It
think what we
depends, right? We have a case study here with boot camp and sports, where screaming at people has been proven to be pretty effective at getting them to change behavior.
Yeah, but that's within a very specific context, right? So I
Mm,
just mean in general, right?
okay.
Like you have to have this. It's sort of like spanking children. How like spanking children, like the robust amount of research shows spanking children's not good for them unless you can put it into a very specific context. So there's context to put on things, right? But really all I mean to say by that is that what people looked at in that situation, right? So like if you have a coach who wants to scream in your face because you fucked up, if you can contextualize that the right way, it can become healthy. But there's probably a lot of people who looked at that just basing on what, the kind of things we say now by 2021. There's probably a lot of people who looked at bosses screaming at you, coaches screaming at you, saw that it was mostly men doing these things and said, that's toxic masculinity. You shouldn't be that way. And they took that correction too far
Mm,
to now you're not allowed to correct people at all.
at all.
And you're raising generations of losers, and you make a million excuses for why it's okay that you're a total loser. You're a do nothing nobody, and there's a million excuses for why that's okay. I'm not saying everybody needs to be a superhero and everybody needs to be, you don't need to be striving to be the most successful person on earth if that's not what you care about. But you should do the best at everything you decide you want to do. You
Yeah.
shouldn't be okay with mediocrity, and you shouldn't be okay with it shouldn't be okay with mediocrity if you got there by doing nothing.
Yeah.
If you just have to face the reality that you're a mediocre human being, I'm a mediocre human being, like I'm 5'8", I'm never going to be able to play in the NBA, right? No matter how much I like basketball, I'm never dunking. It's not happening. I got a
Well, it
bum
could,
hip on
man.
top of it.
If you really put your heart and
You know,
mind into it, man, you can make it
right,
happen. You
right,
could be
and
anything you want to be.
right. Well, that's one of those paradoxes of success, right? Because when you listen to very successful people, basically all of their stories is I worked my ass off and success followed.
Mm.
Now, sure, we can get in there and we can look at the stuff like, Elon Musk started with a whole bunch of money. Various different people had genetic, we'll call it genetic privilege, right? To use the buzzword, right? Like, you're never, probably, I shouldn't say never, but like, who's the shortest MVP in the NBA? Like 6'1", 6 foot? How tall was AI?
AI was what 6'1", I think,
Right? It's
wearing
like the
shoes.
shortest, right? So, like,
I mean,
if you're a
Nate Robinson, he was like 5'9". He played for a little
well,
bit.
what was his name? Bugsy. Sorry, he was
Yeah,
like
he was
five,
like 5'3" or
whatever.
some shit. He played for a little bit, but
Genetic freak. But anyway, Mike Tyson's small for a heavyweight, like short for a heavyweight, but genetic freak in terms of athleticism, right? So like, there's people who win the genetic lottery, whatever, right? We can look at those things, but it's one of those paradoxes of success where you must accept that it is both a matter of what you start with and also how much work you put into it. Because if you start with nothing, you will stay with nothing if you never work. If you
yeah.
start with a lot, you'll never get more than that if you don't work more. So it's both.
So
You have to do both.
going back to something you said, right, around the conversation, taking the word toxic, right, and having a little bit of a conversation around this, because in recent history, toxic has really been
Mm-hmm.
either used to describe masculinity or someone who is doing something that you deem is bad for you, right? So you're like, ooh, that's toxic. Oh, you held me accountable. You're being toxic right now, right? So I think that specifically within the context of masculinity, I will say, I'll go ahead and just throw this out there and kind of think out loud here, that I don't think toxic masculinity exists. I think
Mm-hmm.
toxic people exist. I think
Mm-hmm.
that if you can contextualize like if you can make a list of all of the traits that you would consider toxic masculinity, I know a woman in my life who exhibits those traits. So that
Mm-hmm.
means that we can't really necessarily know. You might be able to say, okay, well, that's masculine energy then. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, then now we're kind of,
Yeah.
I think it's a bit of a stretch there now when we're saying, well, those are masculine traits or whatever it may be, because I think toxic actions and toxic characteristics in a human being are going to be easy to identify, right? You have a short
Mm-hmm.
temper. You like to lash out. You like to yell at people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you have a little bit of narcissistic tendencies where it's all about you all the time. Those things can exist in anyone, and
Mm-hmm.
I've had some pretty awful female bosses in my time in Fortune 500 companies. So I think that toxic masculinity did a lot of harm
Mm-hmm.
simply from saying all of these things on this list. This is only men can be these things,
Mm-hmm.
and if you exhibit these things to any degree, you are a toxic male.
Yeah.
And I think that that's exactly what happened, right? As
Mm-hmm.
we said things like aggression. Well, that's toxic masculinity. If you
Yeah.
show aggression or anger, that's toxic masculinity. And I guess in a perfectly civilized society, you might be able to say maybe,
Mm-hmm.
until, right? So a bad guy's trying to do bad things, and then you're like looking around like, where are all the toxic males at? Because I don't want to deal with this.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I do think a point of contention there, right? So you've noticed fundamental biological differences in behavior between your daughter and your sons.
And they're the same
So,
age for the people, for people who they are practically twins, only 5 months apart.
and they're
Um,
very young. They're
yeah.
very young. So not a whole lot of nurture, right?
Mm,
So that brings up the question of nature versus nurture. Nurture is very important. There's not any psychiatrist, psychologist, neurologist, anybody who researches intelligence or behavior or any of that at this point in time who would tell you that nurture isn't incredibly important, right? But there are, I think by adulthood, society's probably evened things out more or less enough, but I will say this. I totally agree that toxic behavior isn't something that's entirely just what men do, but they're going to, on the average, across 330 million people or 7 billion, how many ever you want to count to, um, On the average, you will see certain expressions of behavior
Mm-hmm.
which are happening more often with
Yeah,
men,
more common with
certain
men.
expressions of behavior that happen more often with women. But then there's also the social aspect that goes on that, right? To a concrete, definitive example. I know, even though there's a lot of women who are abused by men, especially the men in their lives, I personally know quite a few women who have been the victims of, say, spousal abuse, right? Not all of them, but a lot. Um, I don't know a single man who's never been slapped by a girlfriend or a wife.
Yeah. So
Not one.
yeah.
Every
So
single one of us.
every single one of us has been hit by our significant other.
Every single
Yeah.
one. 100%. Not
Yeah.
most of them.
I mean,
100%.
there
However,
might be the outlier, right? Like I don't know.
However, right, even my wife's an absolute angel. She's hit me before out of anger. She's never slapped me in the face, but she slapped me on the arm out of anger. She's an absolute angel, right? She's the nicest person basically everybody who meets her has ever
Hey,
met.
Carl, blink twice if you need me to send help, man.
Anyway, anyway, but that's the other context that goes into it, right? Is that women have ways that they are toxically feminine,
Yeah.
but we contextualize the problem as a male problem.
Yeah,
We
but
say, and
I,
that's where it comes from, is we say that the male expressions of these behaviors are the problem, and the female expressions of them aren't really a problem because, like, okay, your girlfriend beat the shit out of you, but she didn't really hurt you, you pussy. So what are you crying about?
yeah. So and look, man, everything you said, I agree with 100%. I guess where I, my concern is, number one, we're not really calling out toxic femininity, right? We're not
Uh,
out here having that conversation.
well, some people are,
Guys are
but they
quick
get
to
told
label
they're
somebody
misogynists.
guys are real quick to just say, oh yeah, she's just a bitch, like whatever. It's like the blanket statement to
Yeah.
just say like she's got qualities that I'm not really fond of. But for men and for males in particular, there has been what I would categorize as a concerted effort across the board to stifle little boys and young men. Whether it's saying you have way too much energy, right? Like and you could see this like in prescribing patterns or ADHD, ADHD diagnosis and things like that, right? Like where we're overcorrecting qualities like aggression, qualities like energy, and to try to get people to fit into a mold that maybe we're not supposed to. And that's what's going
Yeah.
on across the board, right? Doctors, educators, they're trying to do this right now because of these traits that they have determined are toxic traits.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I think it's dangerous.
I think it's dangerous too. I think it's a massive overcorrection. I think the problem with it is, right, is we spoke about this a little bit before. The purpose of society is to civilize us and make us humans instead of animals. But there's a lot of talk about constructs and what is and isn't a social construct and what we can and can't just get rid of because it's a construct, right? And validity of things, setting aside for a moment that civil rights are a construct, gender equality is a construct, very important things
Are
in
you
our
using
lives
words against me, Carl?
all very important things are all constructs anyway. Constructs are not necessarily good things, and I think when you look at, like, we're supposed to be civilized, right? But the civilization process, and I mean that on an individual level, happens across a lifetime, and it comes with a certain set of responses to the environment and environmental needs.
Sure.
Caveat: I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. Okay, this is effectively just my opinion. That's it, wholesale. It's
Sure.
whatever.
Hey, man, that's why we're fucking here. Who cares?
Right.
Go for it.
It's just my opinion.
Yeah.
So don't fucking put this in any kind of report. But if you decide you want to use it for a thesis, you're welcome. Society, right? Social civilization processes, social and culturalization happens in response to a certain set of environmental causes, right? Like we don't just completely arbitrate this shit.
Mm.
You know, there was not some council of men. It wasn't like a perfect gender equality utopia in the year
Yeah, yeah, that
8000
decided this
BC.
is how it's gonna be.
And there wasn't some council of men who got together and just said, you know what, from now on,
Yeah,
women are property. That's not how it worked,
yeah.
right? Um, these things sort of happen over time as responses to environments, right?
Hmm.
Again, the civil rights movement was largely a response to the environment that we took a bunch of men, put them in warfare, and when they came home, they said, enough's enough, I'm not putting up with this anymore.
Mm.
It was a response to an environment. Happened quickly, right? But some of the forces that we have in play here don't seem to be responding to any sort of environmental need other than trying to make people feel good about themselves.
Mm.
And that's, you know, when you say it like that, it can kind of sound bad, but you have to have like a deeper not intuition, a deeper, you have to try to inspect this a little bit deeper and approach it from a more critical position than does it feel good to me,
Mm.
right? Of course, a society that is accepting of literally everyone and bends over backwards to help everybody out to provide, to just give people what they need, of course that would be an amazing society. But is it realistic, and is it healthy in the long run?
And is it even possible? And
Yeah,
the answer to all three of those questions is no.
I don't have a problem working towards getting as close as possible to
Sure,
that,
but
but we
it's
got to
just
be
it's
careful
not.
about
Yeah,
it.
but like here's the thing, right? Like it's not possible, and I think we can definitively say that it's not. There will
Yeah.
always be outliers. They're
Well,
like just
it's not even a matter of outliers, right? Because the thing about outliers is that they're outliers. The problem with it is that it's not possible for a whole bunch of reasons. Like number one, if you ever do any sort of engineering, you'll know what the law of thermodynamics are. You can't violate the laws of thermodynamics. You can't get nothing from something, so there's no way for us to just give you shit without somebody
hey
working to
man,
make it.
I learned that from the Full Metal Alchemist, right? The law of
Yeah,
equivalent
yeah.
exchange. Like that's
Yeah, yeah,
hey,
yeah,
that's
definitely.
the way it
Jimmy
works.
Neutron, someone in there.
That's right.
You can't get something without working for it. So someone's always going to have to work.
Mm.
There will never be a point in history until we invent, fully autonomous AI where people can just stop working. But only because then robots will be working for us.
Yeah.
Someone's always going to have to work. Someone's going to have to struggle. Someone's going to have to suffer. It's just a matter of who you're okay with doing that, or having that done for you or not, right? And I think, not to get so far away from what we were talking about, to try to bring this back, I think, I don't know, I don't have a problem having people expect me to do things for them. Not at all. I fully embrace the role of being a provider. Lots of guys hate that
Oh,
and they
in
feel
your
used by
family.
it
For
or
a second, I
whatever.
was like, wait, like in what context, right? Because you're saying I don't have a problem with
Mhm.
people expecting me to do things. I was like, what in society? Like my neighbor to
I'm fine
expect,
with
but
I'm fine with
you were talking
no, no,
in
no.
your
I mean,
house.
from the perspective no, I'm talking even from the perspective of society. I don't have a problem with society looking at me and saying, you're a man, so you're going to go fight a war so a woman doesn't have to. I
Mm.
don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with them saying, you're an adult man. We're going to send you to do it instead of sending a child to do it. I
Sure.
don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with the expectation being laid on me to be the person who gets shit done because I like to be that person, right?
Hmm.
I don't have a problem with it. But we are attacking that concept. We're
Yeah.
getting rid of it. Not only from the perspective of just attacking it in general, as people, we live in a system where people don't always get the benefit of their hard work. So I can understand why some people would look at this shitty situation and go, well, I only work like 3 part-time jobs. Why can't I afford rent in the most expensive urban environment in the world? Maybe you should get a full-time job or move somewhere else. Anyway, we're attacking it from a perspective of getting rid of the idea that it's okay for some people to be the people who work and that work needs to happen. And if those people work and they're going to be the ones who do it, maybe it's okay to give those people a little bit more,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Just maybe. I'm not saying there should be a wage gap or that men should run things or anything like that. What I'm saying is that we need people to be willing to do dangerous, hard things And we're removing that from society by attacking the qualities of a person that make them willing to do it.
Yeah. Well, at the root, right? So
Yeah.
you're it's going back to the conversation about little boys, right? You mentioned society's role is to
Hmm.
civilize you, right, and make you less of an animal. But the funny thing is that I don't think that's what's happening, right? I think they're
Hmm.
it depends on the animal we're talking about, because essentially
Hmm.
what's happening is we're creating a bunch of sloths, like people who literally
Yeah.
don't want to work, don't want to do anything. That's not the type of animal you want to be.
Hmm.
That's the like, and that's exactly what's happening is where people are just expecting. Uh, and you know what, man, you brought up a good point, right? About society having these expectations of men, which I think is true. If I'm in a crowded room and it's me, my family, and then let's just say a couple other families, and some shit pops off, and you and I have talked about this at length, where if things go wrong, my wife's eyes immediately find me,
Hmm.
and they kind of look at me and they go, well, what are you going to do about it? And
Hmm.
I have absolutely no problem with that being the dynamic that's set, right? And for those of you that don't know, I spent a lot of my free time training for things that are probably never going to happen in my life, for that very reason. Because if my wife
Hmm.
ever gives me that look, I want to make sure that I'm prepared to do something with myself, and with my family, and not just be a useless man. But I think that with our kids, right, in particular, when I have friends that have kids that are a couple years older than mine, and just hearing how they deal with little boys, right, where it's really difficult for little boys to be little
Hmm.
boys.
Yeah.
And as I have, again, a son and a daughter that are very close in age, and there are very distinct differences in how they like to spend their time. There are very distinct differences in how they manifest their energy, right? Like
Hmm.
they're both bundles of energy, but they manifest it differently. My daughter will scream at the top of her lungs and sing whatever song pops into her head, whereas my son will try to find me, so he can hit me and try to wrestle me and take his old man out. Like that's how it goes. Like my son is constantly trying to kill me, and like
Hmm.
that's how he manifests his energy. And I think my youngest son, he's 18 months old. He's already taking one
Hmm.
path over the other. The way he likes to spend time with me is by smacking the shit out of me too, and he wants to wrestle with me. He wants to be rough. He wants to. It's like doing all of the things that he's not allowed to do with his mom, right? Because I call him on it whenever he tries to get too rough with Kayla. I said,
Hmm.
hey, knock it off. So then he comes over and he plays with me like that.
Hmm.
It's funny that we as a society have become blind to the things that we can readily observe, where we have convinced ourselves that the things that we're observing every day are not true. Like,
Hmm.
no, this can't be, right? Like this isn't normal. These are traits that we must, that they have to grow out of, that we must teach out of them. And
Hmm.
I think, as a parent, and as a grown man, I worry, man. I really
Yeah.
do, because you're talking about academia. I had a chance to mentor a ton of kids. I call them kids. A ton of people. They were between the ages of 18 and 22, and the guys in particular scared me,
Hmm.
because they they were lost,
Yeah.
and they were way more lost than I remember being. And I
Hmm.
don't think it has anything to do with like, oh, I'm already past it, and like that's why I don't remember it this way. No, it's just they're they lack an identity.
Hmm.
They're confused because they're receiving mixed messages from society. Society is telling them that they have to take control and do all of these things because, well, they're men, but then at the same time you're a man, so you should, shut up and sit down and let somebody else. And that's the wrong. I'm not
Hmm.
teaching my sons to be second fiddle to fucking anybody. It's like, no,
Hmm.
you apply to the fucking job and you get it. If a woman applies to the same job as you and you're the better candidate, like, I would hope you get the job. Like, I'm not teaching my boys to play second fiddle to anybody.
Hmm.
Um, but a lot of the kids that I talk to, a lot of the men that I talk to, young men, um, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to feel. They don't know how to experience life anymore because they don't know what society is expecting of them.
Yeah.
And society's either expecting way too much or nothing at all. And I think in either extreme, what you have is just these displaced individuals who are looking for something, and they're not finding it.
Yeah, I definitely think when we look at, like, just look at public school and success rates in public school, where basically, like 30 to 50%, depending on where you live, of all boys will drop out of school and won't even graduate high school, depending on where you live,
Well,
right?
yeah, I don't know the exact numbers, but what I do know is that way more girls graduate school at every level than
80,
guys do.
80 yeah, 85% plus of girls will graduate high school. Of the 85% that graduate high school, 80% of them will go on to college, and 80% of those girls, young women now, will graduate with a degree.
Which is fantastic.
It's amazing. That's
However,
good for all of us.
right?
However,
Yeah.
young boys, 60% to 70% will graduate high school. 50 to 60%, maybe, like, I think in some states it's as high as 80%. It's about as high as girls will go to college, but only 60% of them will graduate. And when you look at, like, we talk about the way young boys and young girls behave, and we look at what happens in, for instance, a K through 12, but the primary school, the K through 5 portion of a classroom, where they're basically built for girls and boys are treated as defective girls. There's not enough recess for anybody, but especially not little boys. The way that students are expected to behave that will get them suspended and kicked out of school lines up very readily with allowing little girls to succeed. And there's nothing wrong with a woman succeeding. But, when men were succeeding for thousands of years at the expense of women, we needed to change society to correct that. I don't understand why the correction included changing society into something that made it more difficult for young men to succeed so that women could succeed instead. I think when I look at a lot of young men, there's a lot of young men out there that are very, very angry about their position in the world because they understand that society expects a whole lot from them, and by 2021, you basically don't get anything for it. It's just a reality. Society likes to talk big. American society right now loves, especially liberal culture, loves to pontificate endlessly about, disrupting things and changing things and deconstructing things. They still demand people to behave in ways that are traditionally masculine. They still lay off the expectation of the provider onto young men. They still expect so much responsibility of character on young men that is not expected of young women. And the difference is now you don't get anything for it, and that there's the expectations are there for young women, but they get something for it. The expectations are there for young men. They don't get anything for it. I don't think it's weird at all that we see so many lost young men and frequently a lot of violent young men. When you look at active shooters, 96% are male. Like, you think, like, some dumbass looks at that and says, oh, it's just because men are more violent.
Yeah,
and again,
somebody would look at that and say, well, obviously that's toxic masculinity, and I think it's an oversimplification of
responding negatively to the fact that your entire survival environment has become antagonistic towards you.
And we're not and this isn't at all, number one, to make excuses for assholes that decide to go on a shooting spree, because there's literally never a good reason to do that. And number two, this isn't to belittle the progress that's been made on behalf of women, right? Where this is great, right? And these numbers show that for a really long time, women were fighting for equality, especially when you consider that they weren't allowed in higher education for the longest time, and then now they're in higher education, and now they're outshining men in higher education. I think that's all fine and good, but now we need to not pump the brakes, but ease off the gas for a second and look around and say, did we lose somebody? And I think the answer is very clear, right? We did.
Yeah.
We No Child Left Behind quickly turned into Leave Little Johnny at the at the door, because
Yeah.
like he's not allowed on the bus. Because again, when you notice that there's no reason why, as education arguably has progressed and as things have become easier and easier for people to get educated, there's really no reason why graduation rates are declining,
Hmm.
other than just the general apathy society has towards male
Hmm.
success. And this
Yeah.
isn't to look, I'm extremely successful. I graduated high school, graduated undergrad and grad school. Like I'm doing really, really great for myself. But as a father, and as someone who has actually taken the time to talk to people that are not related to me and
Hmm.
are in a different age group,
Hmm.
this is something that I can directly see, that it's contributing negatively
Yeah.
to the upbringing of my sons, but also to the day-to-day life of a lot of these young men who are out in society right now, where they just
Hmm.
don't, again, they're told, they're literally left out of every single initiative that's ever talked about, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're a white male, you are left out of every single initiative that's ever talked about. And it's easy, to feel aimless. It's really easy to feel like you don't belong, like you don't have a place, when everyone is
Hmm.
telling you that you're the problem, you're the reason, you're the
Yeah.
cause of global warming, you're the cause of world hunger,
Yeah.
that's the buck stops with you,
Well,
homie, every single time, you
well,
know?
I saw this meme my sister shared on Facebook that was very succinct and I think cognizant, right? Um, and it said it was something along the lines of you're out in public with your daughter and you look over and you see this dad wearing a shirt that says the future's male, and then you have to console your daughter and try to explain to her that no, she can actually do whatever she wants to
Mm,
do, and that shirt's bullshit and that idea is bullshit. Oh, our bad, they didn't say the future's male, it said the future's female and you were with your son, and you turned and you looked at him and said, yep, that's right.
yeah. Yeah,
And
which
that's where
which
we're
to me,
at.
by the way, is bullshit. I'm a dad to both. It's
Mm-hmm.
bullshit. I would celebrate my daughter if she worked her ass off and made something of herself. But if she chose not to, I'm not gonna burn the world down. Like, I'm teaching my kids that you are a product of your effort, regardless of like who you are, right? And the same goes with
Yeah.
my son. Like, I don't, and that's why I'm harping so much on the don't be a doormat. Like, do not
Yeah.
allow the world, like, you demand that people respect you by being the best in the room. And that's how I
Mm-hmm.
was raised, bro, and it worked just fine for me. We talked a lot about, laying out the problem, right? Right now, I think the conversation society is having, um, I don't think they're really helping anybody, but I want to end the episode on a high note. I want to end the episode on talking about what some of the potential solutions are. And I'll go ahead and
Mm-hmm.
kick this off with, from my perspective, raising young men. That for other parents out there who are raising young men or who have young men in their lives, whether you're an aunt, uncle, or you have a friend, or whatever it may be, I think it's really important to have these conversations around, reassuring them, right? Letting them know that it is okay to experience these things, whether it's aggression, and maybe even teaching them on how to manage it, right? My children, I wrestle with my kids all the time. I give them that physical outlet. My sons are always working out with me. They pick up their 5-pound weights and they're sitting while I'm doing my stuff, they're doing their stuff next to me. We do jujitsu together. I'm giving my sons outlets early on for them to be able not to stifle the energy, not to get rid of it, but to harness it and to channel it and do something productive with it. So if you have a young man in your life that might be lost or could benefit from something like this, get creative, find ways that you can maybe introduce and do with them to help them kind of channel this energy, because the alternative is letting society just extinguish it, and that is a surefire way of creating a whole lot of unhappiness in the future. Um, my sons are not going to be medicated for ADHD and things like that. Like, look, if a psychiatrist at some point decides, and like, I don't know, right? Like, I have a certain opinion about it. I think that most boys would be diagnosed with ADHD if we let psychiatrists do what they do. Um, but I think that it's really important, that I have these discussions with my kids and teach them how to do this, and then also just talk to the people around you, and make sure that you're standing up for other men, for young men in particular. I'm a grown man. Like, people can't really hurt me. You know what I'm saying? Like as far as whether it's hurting my feelings or my livelihood or whatever it may be, that's not going to happen. So it's my job, since I have stable footing, to fight these fights that maybe, some of these younger kids, they can't, because they don't have the same stable footing. And I think that that's another thing that people like you and I, by having conversations like this, and also anybody that might be listening to this, those are ways that we can get involved. So what are your thoughts, man?
I don't have children, so I would speak directly to young men. I would say, a lot of the work that I do, like I said, just helping even young men in academics, and a lot of it's just trying to help them figure out where they're going to go, what they're going to do, build a vision and an idea of what their life trajectory is going to be. And that process always starts so much with helping them develop the idea that it's okay to have confidence and it's okay to respect themselves. It's not just, again, there's some research that shows this, but it is my personal life experience that if you are weak, there are two ways that you come out of that. You blame everyone else and you turn into what some people would call a toxic person, and you break others down and you make the world worse. If you are not weak and you strive to be better, you will build yourself up, develop character. If you're concerned, right? If you're just really, maybe you got a bad relationship with your dad. You got a bad relationship with a male role model. Maybe you don't have male role models and all you have is bad experiences with older men. Just understand that society and civilization was built by men who were willing to do rough, hard things, but who remained civilized about it and who were graceful about it. You can have confidence, stand up for yourself, refuse to take shit, push for success, and take what you were owed without being an asshole about it. You can have grace. It's entirely possible.
That's right, man. That's awesome, dude, because there's Jordan Peterson talked about this a little bit too, where he was saying there's nothing virtuous about a bunny. Right? Like a bunny is this harmless creature that, like, it doesn't do harm because it can't do harm. And there's absolutely nothing virtuous about that. And I think the same holds true, right, about men, where you should be doing the difficult things. You should be striving for better. You should be trying to make yourself a competent, dangerous individual, and then choosing to do the right things with that newfound power or whatever it may be. So there you have it, folks. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Stay in school, don't do drugs, graduate, do all those things, and we'll catch you all later. Peace.